The day a billionaire begged a woman to stay was the day he realized money had never been his greatest power. I remember the silence more than anything else. Not the cameras, not the whispers, not the dozens of people pretending not to stare. Just the silence. Emma Brooks stood beneath the soft glow of the charity ballroom lights, her hands folded in front of her, her expression calm in a way that made my chest tighten. 300 people filled the room. CEOs, politicians, investors, people who would answer my phone calls at 2 in the morning, people who spent years trying to earn my approval. None of them mattered in that moment, because the only person I could see was her. And she was walking away. "Emma," I called. My voice sounded unfamiliar, rougher than usual, human. She stopped for exactly 1 second, just enough to let hope sneak into my heart. Then she continued toward the exit. The distance between us couldn't have been more than 30 feet. It felt like 30 miles. Around me, conversations faded into uncomfortable murmurs. I could feel eyes watching, waiting, curious to see what would happen when Ethan Carter didn't get what he wanted. The truth was simple. Neither did I. For 35 years, I had built a life around certainty. Numbers made sense. Markets made sense. Acquisitions made sense. People could be analyzed, predicted, negotiated. Everything had a value. Everything had a solution. That's what made me one of the youngest billionaires in America. That's what made Carter Global worth more than most countries' annual budgets. But none of that prepared me for Emma Brooks. Because Emma never cared who I was. She never cared about the private jets parked on runways waiting for my schedule. She never cared about the penthouse overlooking Central Park. She never cared about the interviews, the magazine covers, or the articles calling me a visionary. If anything, she seemed annoyed by them. The first time we met, she looked at me the way someone looks at a man blocking traffic. Not impressed, not intimidated, just mildly inconvenienced. I should have forgotten her. That would have been the logical thing to do. Instead, she became the one thing I couldn't stop thinking about. The ballroom doors opened. A cold gust of November air slipped inside. Emma stepped closer to the exit. My pulse accelerated. It was ridiculous. One woman leaving a room. Yet somehow it felt like losing something I couldn't replace. Emma. This time the word barely escaped my mouth. She paused again. Slowly, she turned. Her blue eyes found mine across the crowd. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire room seemed suspended between one heartbeat and the next. There was sadness in her eyes. Disappointment, too. Somehow that hurt more than anger ever could. Because anger meant someone still cared enough to fight. Disappointment meant they had already started letting go. I wanted to tell her everything. That I understood now. That she had been right. That every mistake I'd made had come from believing success could substitute for character. That meeting her had forced me to see parts of myself I had spent years avoiding. But the words stayed trapped inside me. Emma offered a small smile. Not bitter. Not cruel. Just final. Then she turned and disappeared through the doors. The silence that followed felt louder than applause. Louder than headlines. Louder than every business victory of my life. And standing there in a room full of people who would have traded anything to be me, I realized I would have given away every dollar I owned for one more chance to make her stay. The strange part was this. 3 months earlier, if someone had told me that a public school teacher from Brooklyn would become the most important person in my world, I would have laughed. Because Emma Brooks was the last woman I ever expected to fall in love with. And this is the story of how she changed everything. 3 months earlier, the rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office on the 48th floor. Manhattan stretched beneath me like a sea of lights, glowing gold and white against the darkness of early autumn. Most people thought views like this never got old. They were wrong. After a while, even extraordinary things became wallpaper. I loosened my tie and glanced at the clock on the wall. 7:23 in the evening. Another 14-hour workday. Another list of meetings. Another quarter of record-breaking profits. My assistant stood near the doorway holding a tablet. The board approved the acquisition, she said. Congratulations. I nodded. Anything else? She hesitated. Your mother called twice. I sighed. That means she wants something. Most likely. A faint smile crossed her face. She also reminded me to remind you about the fundraiser tomorrow night. I rubbed my forehead. The education charity event. Yes. Do I actually have to go? You are the primary donor. I closed my eyes. Right. The truth was I hated events like that. People assumed billionaires enjoyed standing in crowded ballrooms, while strangers laughed at jokes they did not find funny. They assumed attention felt rewarding. Most of the time it felt exhausting. By 8 o'clock, I finally left the office. The city air was cool as I stepped onto the sidewalk. Drivers honked. Steam drifted from a street grate nearby. A man sold pretzels from a cart on the corner. Ordinary life moved around me, while my security detail followed several steps behind. I should have gone home. Instead, I found myself walking. No destination. No plan. Just movement. Sometimes it was the only way to quiet my thoughts. 20 minutes later, I stopped in front of a small bookstore tucked between a coffee shop and a dry cleaner in Brooklyn Heights. The lights inside glowed warmly against the evening darkness. I could not remember the last time I had entered a bookstore. Probably college. On impulse, I stepped inside. The scent hit me immediately. Coffee, paper, old wood. The place was nearly empty except for a few customers browsing quietly between shelves. It felt peaceful, human, real. I wandered toward the back section without paying attention to where I was going. That was when I heard a voice. "You are standing in front of the entire shelf." I turned. A woman stood several feet away holding 2 books against her chest. Blonde hair pulled loosely behind her head. Blue eyes. No designer clothes. No attempt to impress anyone. She looked completely unimpressed by me. "Excuse me," I asked. "The shelf." She pointed. "Some of us are trying to see the books." For a second, I simply stared. Nobody talked to me like that. Employees did not. Investors did not. Reporters definitely did not. Yet here she was, looking mildly annoyed as though I were just another guy blocking her view. "Sorry," I said, stepping aside. "Thank you." Her attention immediately returned to the books. Not a second glance. Not a flicker of recognition. Nothing. I should have walked away. Instead, I found myself watching her examine the shelves with complete concentration. "Do you always correct strangers?" I asked. She looked over. "Only the ones standing in front of what I am trying to read." There was a beat of silence. Then, unexpectedly, I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I had experienced all week. Maybe longer. She seemed surprised by it too. "Well," she said, holding up one of the books, "at least you took it better than most people." I had no idea then that a 30-second conversation in a quiet bookstore was about to change the course of my life. Most people would have ended the conversation there. A brief exchange, a polite nod, then separate lives moving in separate directions. That should have been what happened. Instead, I found myself reaching for a book I had no intention of buying simply to justify staying near her for another minute. Emma slid a novel back onto the shelf and selected another. Her movements were unhurried, comfortable, like someone completely at ease being alone. That alone made her different from most people I knew. Silence usually made people nervous. Emma seemed to enjoy it. "You come here often?" I asked. The second the words left my mouth, I regretted them. It sounded like the kind of line people used in bad movies. She looked at me for a moment before smiling slightly. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether you are asking because you want bookstore recommendations or because you forgot how conversations work." I laughed again. "Fair point. For the record, yes. I come here a lot." She glanced around the small store. "It is quieter than most places in New York." "You live nearby?" "Brooklyn." She shrugged. "About 15 minutes away." "And you read this much for fun?" "You make it sound unusual. Most people spend their evenings staring at their phones." "That is because most people have forgotten how to be bored." I leaned against the shelf. "And boredom is important." "Very." She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "That is where imagination lives." There was something oddly refreshing about the way she answered questions. No performance. No attempt to impress. Just honesty. I realized I had not checked my phone in almost 20 minutes. That was probably a personal record. "What do you do?" I asked. "I teach 3rd grade." I blinked. 3rd grade. That reaction happens a lot. "No, I just expected something else." "Like what?" "I am not sure." "That is because you do not know me." The simple statement landed harder than it should have. She was right. Most of the people in my world spent the first 5 minutes of a conversation listing accomplishments, degrees, promotions, connections. Emma introduced herself with a job she clearly loved and expected nothing in return. "And what do you do?" she asked. For the first time all evening, I hesitated. Normally the answer changed everything. The second people heard my name, the conversation shifted. Expectations appeared. Assumptions followed. I suddenly did not want that to happen. I work in finance, I said. Technically true. Finance. She nodded. You look like someone who works in finance. What exactly does that mean? Expensive watch. Expensive shoes. The expression of a man who probably answers emails at midnight. I glanced at my watch and smiled despite myself. You are surprisingly observant. Comes with the job. She held up a book. Children notice everything. They teach you to pay attention. A voice called her name from the front of the store. An older woman behind the register waved. Emma, we are closing in 5 minutes. Already. Emma looked disappointed. Then she turned back to me. Looks like your finance career survives another day. Looks like it. She smiled politely and started toward the front. For reasons I could not explain, disappointment settled in my chest. It made no sense. I had known her less than half an hour. Yet as she reached the door, she glanced back one final time. Try reading something that is not about business, she said. It might be good for you. Then she disappeared into the cool Brooklyn night, leaving me standing alone in the bookstore wondering why a stranger's opinion suddenly mattered so much. The next morning, I told myself I had already forgotten about her. That lie lasted until 9:14. I was sitting in a glass conference room surrounded by executives discussing a merger worth nearly $4 billion when I realized I had not heard a single word for the last 5 minutes. Numbers flashed across a presentation screen. Forecasts, revenue projections, growth strategies. Normally, this was my world. Today, my thoughts kept drifting back to a small bookstore in Brooklyn and a woman who had accused me of standing in front of an entire shelf. Ethan, my chief financial officer, looked at me expectantly. Your thoughts? I blinked. Proceed with the second proposal. The room nodded. The meeting continued. Somehow, we reached the right decision. I could not remember how. By lunchtime, I was annoyed with myself. I had met hundreds of people. Thousands, probably. Why was this different? Why was I still thinking about someone who barely knew my name? The answer should have been simple. It was not attraction. At least, not entirely. It was curiosity. Emma had treated me exactly the same way she would have treated any other man. No special attention. No fascination. No attempt to gain something. She had not even asked for my last name. By 6 o'clock that evening, I found myself standing outside the same bookstore. I stared at the front window and immediately felt ridiculous. I was a grown man, the founder of a multinational company. Yet somehow I was lingering on a sidewalk hoping to accidentally run into a third-grade teacher. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped inside. The same warm scent of coffee and paper greeted me. A few customers wandered between shelves. The older woman from the register looked up and smiled politely. Back again? She asked. I suppose so. Looking for anything specific? I hesitated. Actually, I was wondering if Emma is here. The woman's smile widened in a way that made me instantly suspicious. Why? No reason. That is usually what people say when there is definitely a reason. I almost laughed. Apparently Emma was not the only one in this neighborhood who enjoyed making life difficult. She works here sometimes? I asked. Volunteers on Tuesdays. The woman glanced at the clock. You missed her by 20 minutes. An unexpected wave of disappointment hit me. 20 minutes. Somehow that felt worse than if she had not come at all. I picked up a book from a nearby display and pretended to examine the cover. She is a good person, the woman said quietly. I looked over. What makes you say that? Because she spends her free time helping other people when nobody is paying attention. There was no pride in her voice. No exaggeration. Just simple truth. Something about that stayed with me as I purchased the book and stepped back into the evening air. Across the street, children laughed as they chased each other past a small pizza shop. Traffic crawled through the intersection. Life continued exactly as it always had. Yet for the first time in years, I found myself looking forward to tomorrow. Not because of a deal, not because of a meeting, because somewhere in Brooklyn, a woman who could not have cared less about my bank account had unknowingly become the most interesting person in New York. 2 days later, I saw her again. Not in the bookstore. Not by accident. The annual education fundraiser occupied the grand ballroom of a historic Manhattan hotel, the kind of place where crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings 30 feet high, and every table centerpiece cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. I arrived 20 minutes late, hoping to fulfill my obligations and leave as quickly as possible. My mother greeted me near the entrance with the expression she reserved for situations she considered socially important. "You are late," she said. "I am here." Barely. She adjusted the sleeve of my jacket. "Try smiling tonight. People donate more when they believe billionaires experience human emotions." I almost laughed. Instead, I scanned the crowded room. Hundreds of guests moved between tables. Teachers, administrators, donors, local politicians. Then I saw her. Emma stood near the stage speaking with two older women. She wore a simple navy blue dress that somehow looked more elegant than gowns worth thousands of dollars. Her hair rested loosely on her shoulders. She was smiling at something one of the women had said. For a moment, the noise of the ballroom seemed to fade. "Who are you staring at?" my mother asked. I looked away immediately. No one. That was not a no one look. Before I could respond, an event organizer approached. "Mr. Carter, thank you for coming. We would love to introduce you to several teachers whose programs benefited from your foundation." 10 minutes later, I found myself shaking hands and posing for photographs. Normally, I could navigate these conversations effortlessly. Tonight, my attention kept drifting across the room. Eventually, the organizer guided a small group toward me. "And this is Emma Brooks, one of our outstanding elementary educators." Emma looked up. Recognition flashed across her face. "Finance guy," she said. I blinked. "Third grade teacher." The organizer looked confused. Emma looked amused. I looked ridiculous. "You know each other?" the organizer asked. "We met at a bookstore," Emma replied. He was blocking important literature. I groaned softly. I was hoping that story would not survive. Actions have consequences. The organizer laughed politely before being pulled away by another guest. Suddenly, it was just the two of us standing beside a table filled with auction items. "So," Emma said, crossing her arms lightly, "finance brought you here too?" "Something like that. You still have not told me exactly what you do." "I work with investments." "That sounds suspiciously vague. Maybe I am a mysterious person." She looked at me for 2 seconds. "No," I laughed despite myself. Then an announcement echoed through the ballroom. The event was beginning. Guests started moving toward their seats. Emma glanced toward the stage. "I should go." "Wait." The word escaped before I could stop it. She turned back. "What? Would you like to have coffee sometime?" Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Not impressed. Not flustered. Just surprised. "Are you asking because you enjoy coffee?" she asked. "Or because you still need bookstore recommendations?" For the first time in a long while, I genuinely did not know what answer would impress someone. And strangely, that made me want her answer even more. Emma studied me for a second as guests continued filing toward their tables. The orchestra played softly somewhere near the stage. Crystal glasses reflected the warm chandelier light overhead. Everything about the evening felt polished and carefully planned. Emma somehow felt completely separate from all of it. "Coffee sounds reasonable," she said finally. "That is not exactly a yes. It is not exactly a no either." I smiled. "I will take that as progress. That might be your first mistake." Before I could answer, someone called her name from across the ballroom. A group of teachers waved her over. She pointed toward them. "I should go, right? Good luck with your mysterious investment career." Then she disappeared into the crowd. The rest of the evening should have been easy. Speeches, donations, networking, the same routine I had followed for years. Instead, I found myself distracted. Halfway through the event, I stood near the back of the room listening to a presentation about educational funding. A young waiter accidentally brushed against one of the guests seated near the front. A few drops of water spilled onto the tablecloth. It was a minor mistake, barely noticeable. Unfortunately, the guest reacted as though a national disaster had occurred. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" the man snapped loudly. The waiter could not have been older than 20. His face immediately turned red. "I am very sorry, sir." Sorry does not fix carelessness. Several people looked away uncomfortably. Others pretended not to notice. I felt irritation rise in my chest. Not because of the waiter, because scenes like this happened every day in rooms filled with powerful people. Most simply ignored them. Before I could decide whether to intervene, another voice spoke first. "Actually," Emma said calmly, "I think it does." The room seemed to pause. The guest looked up. "Excuse me." Emma stood from her chair. He apologized immediately. "It was an accident." The man frowned. "This is none of your concern." "It became my concern when you started embarrassing someone for making a human mistake." Her tone remained polite, steady, controlled. Somehow that made her words even stronger. The waiter looked stunned. So did several people nearby. The guest shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I was simply expecting professionalism. Then perhaps you should demonstrate some. Silence followed. Not hostile silence. The kind that appears when everyone realizes someone has spoken an uncomfortable truth. Eventually, the man muttered something under his breath and returned his attention to the stage. Emma sat back down as though nothing unusual had happened. The waiter quietly thanked her before moving away. I stared at her from across the room. She never saw me. Or maybe she did and simply did not care. Either way, the moment stayed with me. Later that night, after the event ended, I found her near the exit collecting her coat. "You embarrassed that guy," I said. "No." She slipped one arm into her sleeve. "He embarrassed himself. Most people would have stayed silent. Most people do." She looked directly at me. That is usually why problems last so long. The words landed harder than she probably intended. Because deep down, I knew she was right. And for the first time in years, I found myself wondering how many times I had stayed silent simply because it was easier. The following Saturday, I found myself driving across Brooklyn instead of spending the morning reviewing quarterly reports. My calendar had been carefully cleared for work. Somehow, I had ignored all of it. Emma had mentioned during our conversation that her school hosted a community reading program once a month. Children gathered. Volunteers helped. Families came when they could. It sounded simple, ordinary, which was probably why I could not stop thinking about it. The school sat on a quiet street lined with brownstone buildings and trees beginning to surrender their autumn leaves. Laughter drifted through the open gymnasium doors as I approached. Inside, folding tables were covered with books. Parents chatted nearby. Children raced between activity stations with the kind of energy only children seemed capable of producing. Nobody paid attention to me. It was strangely refreshing. Then I spotted Emma. She sat cross-legged on the floor beside a small circle of students, holding an illustrated book open on her lap. The children hung on every word. One little girl leaned against her shoulder. Another boy raised his hand every 30 seconds with a question. Emma answered each one with complete patience. I stood near the entrance longer than I intended, watching, listening, learning. It struck me that she was exactly the same person here as she had been everywhere else. No performance, no audience, no hidden agenda, just genuine care. "You made it." Her voice pulled me from my thoughts. I turned. She was smiling. "You sound surprised." "A little." She tilted her head. "Most people say they will come to these things, and then they do not. Usually." I glanced around the room. "Looks like they are missing out." Her smile softened slightly. "That is nice of you to say." Before I could answer, a boy around 8 years old approached carrying a worn paperback book held together with tape. "Miss Brooks," he asked quietly, "can you help me with this page again?" "Of course, Tyler." She immediately knelt beside him. The boy pointed to several words. Emma guided him through each sentence patiently. No rush, no frustration, just encouragement. 10 minutes later, Tyler was reading the paragraph by himself. The smile that spread across his face could have powered the entire city. "You did it," Emma told him. "I knew you could." The boy practically floated away. I looked at her. "You remember all their names. They are important." She said it as though there could not possibly be another answer. "There are dozens of kids here, and every one of them matters." The simplicity of her response hit me harder than I expected. In my world, people were often reduced to numbers. Clients, employees, shareholders, performance metrics. Emma seemed incapable of seeing human beings that way. As the morning continued, I watched her move from child to child, helping, listening, encouraging, never seeking recognition, never drawing attention to herself. Somewhere around noon, I realized something uncomfortable. She had not changed. I was the one changing. Because for the first time in years, I was beginning to question whether success meant what I had always believed it meant. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm I never would have predicted. Not dramatic, not complicated, just consistent. And somehow that made it more dangerous. Monday mornings still began with meetings and forecasts. Investors still expected answers. Reporters still requested interviews. Nothing about my professional life changed. Yet somewhere between conference calls and board presentations, Emma had become part of my daily thoughts. Sometimes it was a message recommending a book. Sometimes it was a photograph of a classroom art project that had gone spectacularly wrong. Once she sent a picture of a paper snowman wearing sunglasses because one of her students insisted winter needed more confidence. I laughed so hard my assistant thought I had finally lost my mind. The strange part was how natural it felt. One Thursday evening, we met at a small coffee shop near Prospect Park. Rain tapped softly against the windows while people hurried past outside, carrying umbrellas. Emma wrapped both hands around a mug of hot chocolate. "You know," she said, "most people who work in finance spend a lot more time talking about themselves." "Is that a complaint?" "Just an observation." I smiled. "Maybe I am trying to improve." "That would imply you have flaws." "I have plenty." "Good." She took a sip. "Perfect people are exhausting." I watched her for a moment. "You really mean that?" "Of course I do. Most people spend their lives trying to appear perfect. Most people are afraid of being real." The answer lingered between us. Outside, headlights reflected across rain-soaked pavement. Inside, everything felt warm, comfortable, easy. A feeling I had spent years searching for in expensive vacations and exclusive events without ever finding it. As November slipped toward December, I started noticing small things. The way Emma always remembered the names of waiters and cashiers. The way she carried granola bars in her purse because one of her students occasionally forgot breakfast. The way she listened when people spoke, as though every conversation mattered. Nobody had taught me to notice things like that. My world rewarded ambition, efficiency, achievement. Emma paid attention to kindness. One afternoon, I arrived at her school carrying several boxes of books her reading program had requested. I expected gratitude, maybe excitement. Instead, Emma frowned. "You carried all of these yourself?" "There were 6 boxes." "That is not an answer." "I exercise." She rolled her eyes. "You are impossible." I should have felt offended. Instead, I spent the rest of the day smiling. That was when the realization finally arrived. Quiet, uninvited, impossible to ignore. It happened while watching her help a student tie a shoelace before dismissal. Nothing dramatic. No music. No lightning bolt from the sky. Just a simple moment. A normal moment. Yet something shifted inside me. Because I suddenly understood why I looked forward to every conversation. Why every message brightened my day. Why every goodbye felt slightly too short. I was falling for her. Not because she was extraordinary in the way magazines described extraordinary people. Because she was extraordinary in all the ways that actually mattered. And for the first time in my life, that realization scared me more than any business risk ever had. The problem with falling for someone is that eventually reality arrives. It does not knock. It does not ask permission. It simply walks into the room and sits down. December arrived with freezing winds and shorter days. Holiday lights appeared across the city. Storefront windows glowed. Families rushed through crowded sidewalks carrying shopping bags and hot coffee. On the surface, everything felt festive. Underneath, cracks were beginning to appear. It started with something small. Emma invited me to a holiday fundraiser organized by parents at her school. Nothing formal. Just a community event held in a church basement. Folding chairs. Homemade cookies. Decorations crafted by children. The kind of gathering I would never have attended before meeting her. I showed up 20 minutes early carrying a tray of pastries from a bakery someone had once flown to Paris to experience. The moment I walked inside, I realized my mistake. The pastries cost more than the entire refreshment table combined. Emma noticed immediately. "Ethan." Her voice was gentle. "What?" I looked around. "Too much." "A little." She smiled apologetically. "People here do not measure kindness that way." The word stayed with me all evening. Later that week, another moment followed. Then another. Small things. Tiny reminders that our worlds were very different. At lunch one afternoon, Emma mentioned that her mother had postponed a medical appointment because insurance would not cover part of the expense. I immediately started calculating solutions. Specialists. Hospitals. Private care. To me, problems existed to be solved. Resources existed to be used. "You are doing it again," Emma said. "Doing what?" "Trying to throw money at something." I frowned. "I am trying to help." "I know." Her expression softened. "But not every problem needs a billionaire solution." I laughed, but part of me felt frustrated. Because helping seemed obvious. Why struggle when assistance was available? Yet Emma viewed the world differently. For her, dignity mattered as much as outcomes. Maybe more. The tension grew during a dinner at my mother's apartment overlooking Central Park. I had invited Emma because I genuinely wanted her there. Unfortunately, I underestimated how different the evening would feel through her eyes. Conversation drifted toward vacation homes, investment portfolios, and private memberships. Topics so normal in my world that I barely noticed them anymore. Emma remained polite, friendly, gracious, but quieter than usual. On the drive home, snowflakes drifted across the windshield in soft white spirals. "You were quiet tonight," I said. She stared out the passenger window for several seconds. I was listening. To what? A room full of people discussing things most families never even dream about. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "My family means well." "I know." She smiled sadly. "That is what makes it harder." Silence filled the car. Not angry silence. Thoughtful silence. The kind that reveals truths nobody wants to say out loud. For the first time, I realized that caring about each other might not be enough. Because no matter how much time we spent together, no matter how many conversations we shared, we were still standing on opposite sides of a divide neither of us had created. And somewhere deep down, I began to fear that one day that divide would ask us both to choose. The mistake happened 3 days before Christmas. The worst part was that my intentions were good. At least, I thought they were. Snow covered the sidewalks outside my office while Manhattan rushed toward the holidays. Inside, I sat staring at a report I had no interest in reading. My thoughts kept returning to a conversation Emma and I had shared the week before. Her mother's postponed treatment. The insurance complications. The quiet worry she had tried so hard to hide. I remembered the exhaustion in her eyes when she thought nobody was looking. I remembered how quickly she changed the subject whenever money entered the conversation. And I remembered feeling completely helpless, which was unfamiliar territory for me. Problems had always been solved with resources. If someone needed help, you provided help. Simple, logical, efficient. So I made a phone call, then another. Within 48 hours, arrangements had been made through one of the charitable medical foundations connected to my company. The outstanding expenses disappeared. Appointments were scheduled. Specialists became available. Everything was handled quietly, privately. I specifically instructed everyone involved not to mention my name. I convinced myself that was proof I was doing the right thing. Then New Year's Eve arrived. Emma called me just after lunch. Her voice sounded different. Not angry. Worse. Disappointed. "Did you pay for my mother's treatment?" she asked. The question hit like cold water. I closed my office door. "Emma, did you?" Silence answered for me. On the other end of the line, I heard her exhale slowly. "How did you find out?" I asked. "Because people talk, Ethan." Her voice remained calm. "And because foundations do not suddenly appear out of nowhere." I was trying to help. "I know." "Then why does it sound like I did something terrible?" Another silence. Longer this time. "Because you never asked me." I leaned against my desk. "If I asked, you would have said no." That was supposed to be my choice. The words landed harder than any accusation could have. Your mother needed care. And I needed respect. My chest tightened. "Emma, that is not fair." "No." Her voice cracked slightly for the first time. "You decided what was best for me. You solved a problem I never asked you to solve. Then you expected me to be grateful. I never expected that." Even as I spoke, I was no longer sure it was true. "You still do not understand." The sadness in her voice hurt more than anger ever could. "You keep trying to save people when nobody asked to be rescued." I wanted to argue, wanted to explain, wanted her to see the situation through my eyes. Instead, a terrible realization began forming in the silence between us. Maybe she already understood my perspective perfectly. Maybe I was the one who had failed to understand hers. "Emma," I said quietly, "please." But she sounded tired now. Tired in a way I had never heard before. "I need some time." Then the call ended. The line went silent. And for the first time since meeting her, I stared at my phone and felt something I had not felt in years. Regret. January arrived wrapped in gray skies and bitter wind. New York looked frozen. So did my life. The first week after Emma's call, I convinced myself she simply needed space. The second week, I stopped lying to myself. Her messages disappeared. Her calls stopped. Every conversation thread ended with silence. I respected her decision because I had no other choice. That did not make it easier. My penthouse had always been quiet. I used to enjoy that. Now the silence felt different. Larger somehow. Every room reminded me of things that had nothing to do with furniture or architecture. The chair where she once laughed at my attempt to describe a third-grade science project. The kitchen counter where she had stood drinking coffee while explaining why children were far better judges of character than adults. The balcony where she had spent 20 minutes watching snowfall, because she claimed people forgot how beautiful ordinary things could be. I noticed all of it because she was gone. Work became my refuge. Then it became my prison. I arrived before sunrise, left after dark, signed documents, approved projects, attended meetings. Every achievement felt strangely hollow. One afternoon, my assistant placed a financial report on my desk. "The foundation expansion proposal is ready," she said. I barely looked up. "Approve it." She hesitated. "You usually review these personally." "Not today." After she left, I stared at the city through the window. Somewhere beyond those buildings, Emma was living her life, teaching her students, helping her community, existing perfectly well without me. The realization hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted her to need me, because I had finally understood that she never had. One Saturday morning, I found myself standing outside the bookstore where we first met. Snow lined the sidewalks. The familiar bell chimed as I entered. The older woman behind the counter recognized me immediately. Her smile faded when she saw my expression. "You look tired," she said. "I am." She studied me carefully. "You made a mistake." It was not a question. "Apparently." She nodded as though confirming something obvious. "Good." I blinked. "Good. People who never make mistakes rarely learn anything." I laughed softly despite myself. "That sounds like something Emma would say." "That is because I stole it from her." The answer made my chest tighten. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then the woman placed a book on the counter. The cover was worn from years of use. "She donated this here years ago," she said. "Read the note inside." I opened the cover. A handwritten message filled the first page. "The world changes when we stop asking what people can do for us and start asking what we can do for them." I stared at the words for a long time. Not because they were complicated, because they were simple, and because I suddenly realized how often I had approached life from the opposite direction. When I returned home that evening, I sat alone beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Snow drifted quietly through the darkness. For the first time since losing Emma, I stopped focusing on how much I missed her. Instead, I asked myself a different question. What if becoming the man she respected mattered more than convincing her to come back? February arrived with clear skies and bitter mornings. The city was beginning to wake from winter, but my life looked very different than it had a few months earlier. Not because I had found happiness, because I had stopped chasing control. For years, every goal in my life followed the same formula. Identify a problem, create a solution, execute the plan. Success was simply a matter of effort and resources. Emma had taught me that people were not projects. Caring about someone did not give you the right to decide what was best for them. That lesson changed more than my relationship with her. It changed the way I looked at everything. I started spending time inside the programs my foundation funded instead of merely signing approvals from a conference room. I visited schools, community centers, literacy programs. Not for publicity, not for photographs. Most visits were never announced. Sometimes I simply listened. One afternoon, I sat in the back of a classroom while students presented essays about their future dreams. A boy stood at the front holding a crumpled sheet of paper. His voice shook as he read, yet he kept going. When he finished, the room erupted with applause. The smile on his face stayed with me for days. Before meeting Emma, I probably would have focused on budgets and statistics. Now I found myself paying attention to people. Real people. Their stories. Their struggles. Their victories. The change did not happen overnight. Some habits are stubborn. Some lessons require repetition. But little by little, I began to understand what Emma had been trying to show me all along. Dignity matters. Respect matters. Listening matters. One Saturday morning, I volunteered at a neighborhood reading event organized by another school district. Nobody recognized me. Nobody cared who I was. Children handed me books and demanded dramatic character voices. I failed spectacularly. They informed me of this repeatedly. For 2 hours, I laughed more than I had during entire years of my previous life. Later that evening, I sat alone in my apartment watching the sunset paint the skyline gold and orange. My phone rested beside me. Months earlier, I would have been tempted to call Emma, to explain, to persuade, to convince her that I had changed. Instead, I left the phone untouched. Because true change is not something you announce. It is something you live. If our paths crossed again someday, she would see it for herself. And if they never did, then becoming a better man was still worth the effort. For the first time, I understood that growth was not a strategy for winning someone back. It was a responsibility, a choice, a daily practice. The strange thing was that once I stopped focusing on what I had lost, I finally started appreciating what she had given me. Not a relationship, not a future, something far more valuable. A new way of seeing the world. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet hope remained. Not hope that she would return. Hope that if fate ever offered me another chance, I would finally be worthy of it. Spring arrived quietly. The trees in Central Park began turning green again. Outdoor tables returned to sidewalks. The city felt lighter, as though it had finally remembered how to breathe. Nearly 4 months had passed since Emma and I last spoke. 4 months of learning. 4 months of rebuilding parts of myself I had ignored for years. I no longer checked my phone hoping for a message. I no longer drove past places we used to visit. Missing her had not disappeared. It had simply changed shape. It became gratitude. One Saturday afternoon, I attended an education conference hosted at a public library in Brooklyn. One of our literacy initiatives had been invited to participate. I planned to stay for an hour, maybe 2, then return to Manhattan. Fate had other plans. The conference hall buzzed with conversation. Teachers moved between workshops carrying notebooks and coffee cups. Volunteers directed guests through crowded corridors. I was reviewing materials at a display table when I heard a familiar laugh somewhere behind me. My heart stopped. Not figuratively. Physically. 1 second it was beating normally. The next it seemed to forget its job entirely. Slowly, I turned. Emma stood near a group of educators across the room. Sunlight streamed through tall windows behind her. She looked exactly the same and completely different at once. The same smile. The same blue eyes. The same quiet confidence. Yet something had changed. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was time. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she saw me. Surprise crossed her face, followed by something softer. Neither of us looked away. Eventually, she walked over. Ethan. My name sounded unfamiliar in her voice after so many months. Hi, Emma. Brilliant opening. Billionaire vocabulary at its finest. To my relief, she laughed. Still awkward sometimes? Apparently. A comfortable silence settled between us. Not the painful silence from before. Something gentler. More mature. How have you been? She asked. Better. I meant it. You? Good. She smiled. Busy. The kids keep finding creative ways to challenge my patience. I imagine they are very talented. Unfortunately, we both laughed. The tension faded. Not completely. Just enough. As we talked, I noticed something important. I was not trying to impress her anymore. I was not searching for perfect words. I was simply enjoying the conversation. The way I had from the beginning. Eventually, Emma looked at me thoughtfully. You seem different. Months earlier, I would have rushed to explain everything. This time, I simply nodded. I am. She studied me for a moment, then smiled. A real smile. The kind I had missed more than I cared to admit. Good. One word. Yet it meant everything. Outside, the afternoon sun painted golden patterns across the library floor. People continued moving around us. Conversations continued. Life continued. And standing there beside Emma, I finally understood something. The greatest gift she ever gave me was not her affection. It was perspective. She taught me that success without humility is empty. That kindness matters when nobody is watching. That respect cannot be replaced by generosity. Most importantly, she taught me that becoming a better person is never a transaction. It is a choice. Every day, we left the conference together an hour later. No grand declarations. No dramatic promises. Just 2 people walking through Brooklyn beneath a bright spring sky. Maybe the future would bring another chance. Maybe it would not. For once, I was not trying to control the outcome. Because the richest thing I had ever possessed was not a company, a building, or a bank account. It was the opportunity to become the man she always believed I could be. And this time, as Emma walked beside me instead of away from me, I intended to earn that opportunity one day at a time.